It was a bustling evening at the prestigious Lumiere Grand Hotel, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers cast diamond shadows and silk-draped tables held conversations worth more than most people earned in a year. Yet amid the soft murmur of deal-making and the gentle clink of expensive wine glasses, stood a painfully shy waitress named Megan Bain, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her crisp white apron. She had been working here for barely 3 weeks, invisible among the powerful guests who never looked twice at those who served them. But that evening, a single gesture, a moment of courage born from grief, would shatter the heart of the city's most untouchable billionaire and leave an entire restaurant in tears. If you believe in the power of compassion, the strength of small acts, and the bridges we build through understanding, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Cleo's Tale, because stories like this one prove that sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest truths. Megan had always lived in the margins. Life had never offered her the comfort of confidence or the luxury of being seen. She grew up in a cramped apartment where silence became survival. Her mother died when she was 14, leaving her to raise her younger sister Lily, who was born profoundly deaf. While other teenagers worried about prom dresses and college applications, Megan spent her evenings learning American Sign Language, her fingers forming words in the air, building a bridge to the only family she had left. That skill, born of love, loss, and desperate necessity, had become her most precious and painful possession, a language that once connected her to everything and now only reminded her of what she'd lost. 7 years ago, a rainy afternoon and a distracted driver took Lily away, and with her went Megan's voice. She hadn't signed a single word since the funeral. The Lumiere Grand Hotel existed in a universe far removed from Megan's reality. It was where tech moguls, politicians, and old money dynasties gathered beneath vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of classical mythology. And that particular evening, Megan was assigned to Table 12, the restaurant's most exclusive private section, reserved for billionaire Kurt Brown and his 3 young daughters. Kurt was legendary in the business world, a tech titan worth over $4 billion, known for his razor-sharp mind and ice-cold demeanor. The staff whispered about him in hushed, nervous tones, a man who had revolutionized cloud computing but seemed incapable of human warmth, a widower who guarded his family with almost frightening intensity. The head server had been explicit in her instructions. Invisible service only. Do not engage. Do not look directly at the children. Mr. Brown values privacy above all else. When Megan approached their table, her heart hammering against her ribs, she noticed something that made her freeze mid-step. 3 identical little girls sat perfectly still in their chairs. Emma, Sophia, and Olivia, dressed in coordinated white dresses with matching ribbons in their blonde hair. But it wasn't their eerie stillness that caught Megan's attention. It was the small, discreet hearing aids visible behind each girl's ear. It was the way their eyes tracked their father's lips with desperate intensity as he spoke to the businessmen flanking him. It was the practiced, hollow smile they wore, the same smile Lily used to give when she was surrounded by a hearing world that refused to slow down for her. Megan's chest tightened. She recognized that look, the exhausting effort of existing between 2 worlds, one filled with sound and one embraced by silence, where you were always translating, always pretending, always just slightly out of sync. Kurt glanced up sharply, his steel-gray eyes noting Megan's hesitation with clear impatience. He expected efficiency, professionalism, not this frozen waitress staring at his daughters. His jaw tightened, about to dismiss her with a curt word. But before he could speak, before she could second-guess herself into safety, Megan did something that shattered every rule she'd been given. She set down her tray on the service cart with trembling hands. Then, her fingers moving with a grace that contradicted her fear, she began to sign. Her hands formed the question slowly, deliberately, as if summoning words from a grave she'd sealed 7 years ago. Would you like some water? For one suspended heartbeat, the entire universe around them seemed to hold its breath. The 3 little girls went completely still, their eyes widening in pure shock. Emma's mouth fell open. Sophia's hand flew to her chest. Olivia leaned forward as if she'd seen a ghost. Then, as if a dam had burst inside them, tears began streaming down their faces. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition, of validation, of finally being seen. Emma's hands began to move in response, slowly at first, then faster, desperate. "You can understand us? You can really see us?" Megan nodded, her own eyes filling, and signed back, "I can see you. I've always been able to see you." Kurt Brown, the man who had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, who had fired executives with surgical precision, who had built an empire on the foundation of never showing weakness, turned to see what had stolen his daughter's attention. And what he saw stopped his heart. His 3 daughters, the girls he'd watched retreat further into silence every day since their mother died, the children he'd tried so desperately to protect by keeping the world at arm's length, were alive in a way he hadn't seen in 5 years. Their faces were radiant, transformed, joyful. Their small hands moved rapidly through the air, conversing with this unknown waitress in a language he didn't speak, a language he'd been too afraid to learn. And as Megan signed back to them, asking about their favorite foods, telling them about the dessert menu, sharing tiny jokes that made them giggle silently behind their hands, something inside Kurt Brown, something he'd believed was permanently frozen, cracked wide open. As the dinner unfolded, something extraordinary happened. Megan didn't just serve, she connected. She signed each menu option with patient care, explained ingredients in ways that made the girls' eyes light up, and even snuck them conspiratorial signs about which dessert she would choose if she were 8 years old. The 3 girls became different children entirely. Animated, engaged, present. They signed questions about Megan's name, her favorite color, whether she had siblings. Other diners began to notice the unusual scene. The stoic billionaire sitting in stunned silence while his daughters carried on an animated, soundless conversation with their server. Whispers rippled through the elegant dining room. But the only sound that mattered was the one no one else could hear. The sound of 3 little girls finally being understood, and the sound of a grieving sister's heart remembering that Lily's language was never meant to die with her. It was meant to live on in moments exactly like this one. And when Kurt Brown's tears finally fell, right there in front of senators and CEOs and the Society Pages photographers who happened to be dining nearby, not a single person in that restaurant was left unmoved. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak someone else's language. Even when your hands are shaking. Even when it breaks your heart. Especially then. Megan Bain had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. For 3 weeks now, she'd moved through the Lumiere Grand Hotel like a shadow. Present but unnoticed, necessary but invisible. She'd learned to anticipate needs before guests voiced them, to refill water glasses without making eye contact, to exist in the peripheral vision of the wealthy and powerful without ever demanding acknowledgement. It was a survival skill she'd honed long before she ever set foot in this gleaming palace of marble and gold. Her studio apartment told a different story than the one she presented to the world. It was small, barely 400 square feet on the edge of the city where rent was cheap and sirens were frequent. But what made it unbearable wasn't the size or the peeling paint or the radiator that clanked through winter nights. It was Lily's things. Still exactly where they'd been 7 years ago. The purple backpack with the butterfly patches hung on a hook by the door. Her collection of smooth river stones lined the windowsill, each one labeled in Lily's careful handwriting with where she'd found it. The bookshelf held picture books about deaf heroes. Helen Keller, Niall DeMarco, Marley Matlin, their spines creased from countless readings. Megan couldn't pack them away. Every time she tried, her hands would freeze halfway to the cardboard box, and she'd find herself sitting on the floor, holding one of Lily's stuffed animals, unable to breathe. The sign language had started when Megan was 15 and Lily was just 3 years old. Their mother had taken Lily to specialist after specialist. hoping each one would say the previous diagnosis was wrong. But the answer was always the same: profound sensory neural hearing loss, bilateral, permanent. While their mother worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for hearing aids and speech therapy, Megan had checked out library books with titles like Signing Made Simple and ASL for Beginners. She'd practiced in the bathroom mirror until her fingers moved with fluency, transforming the isolation she felt into something purposeful. Those had been good years despite everything. Lily had been bright and curious, her hands always moving, always asking why and how and what if. They'd developed their own private language within the language, special signs just for them. Lily's sign for sister was a modified version. Instead of the standard sign, she'd trace a heart over Megan's hand first. Every single time. Now, Megan kept her hands carefully still. At the hotel, she carried trays with rigid precision, her fingers wrapped tightly around handles and stems, never floating free, never forming shapes in the air. She'd trained herself to think in English again, to suppress the automatic translation that used to happen whenever she saw or heard anything. Sign language had become a locked room in her mind, and she'd thrown away the key the day they lowered Lily's small white coffin into the ground. Becoming furniture was easier than being human. Furniture didn't remember. Furniture didn't grieve. Furniture simply served its purpose and then faded into the background, unnoticed and undisturbed. Until table 12 changed everything. The whisper started in the kitchen at 5:47 p.m. and spread through the Lumiere Grand like wildfire. Kurt Brown was coming. Tonight. Table 12. The usual pre-service bustle transformed into something sharper, more anxious. Servers who normally chatted and joked fell silent, double-checking their uniforms, rehearsing their most polished smiles. The sommelier pulled out bottles that cost more than Megan's monthly rent. The head chef personally inspected every plate setting in the private dining section. Megan had heard the name before. Impossible not to in a city where Kurt Brown's influence touched everything from the skyline to the stock market. At 42, he'd built an empire that had revolutionized cloud computing and data security, transforming a garage startup into a technology juggernaut worth billions. Forbes called him a visionary. The Wall Street Journal called him ruthless. His competitors called him a lot of things, mostly behind closed doors and after their companies had been absorbed into his ever-expanding portfolio. But it was the personal details that the staff whispered about in hushed tones. 5 years ago, his wife Catherine had died during an emergency C-section, delivering their triplet daughters. The medical complications had been sudden and catastrophic. She'd hemorrhaged on the operating table while Kurt waited outside, expecting to meet his 3 newborns and instead leaving the hospital a widower with 3 fragile infants who would never know their mother. Since then, he'd become even more isolated, building walls around himself and his daughters that no one was permitted to breach. Paparazzi who got too close found themselves facing lawsuits. Journalists who asked about his family were permanently blacklisted. He attended charity galas and business dinners, but always alone, his personal life locked away behind security systems and non-disclosure agreements. The head server, a severe woman named Patricia who'd worked at the Lumiere for 20 years, gathered the evening staff for a briefing. Her expression was grim. "Mr. Brown is bringing his daughters tonight. 3 girls, age 8, triplets. Listen carefully because I will only say this once." She paused, making eye contact with each server. "Invisible service only. You do not look directly at the children. You do not speak to the children. You do not smile at them, wave at them, or acknowledge their existence in any way unless Mr. Brown explicitly addresses you first. He values their privacy above all else, and any violation will result in immediate termination. Am I understood?" A chorus of murmured agreements rippled through the group. Megan's stomach tightened. She'd served demanding clients before, celebrities who wanted their entrees prepared in impossibly specific ways, hedge fund managers who sent back wine because the vintage wasn't quite right. But something about this felt different. Heavier. Don't acknowledge their existence. What kind of father demanded his children be treated like ghosts? Megan. Patricia's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. You'll be assigned to table 12. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as every eye turned toward her. They arrived at exactly 7:15 p.m., Kurt Brown sweeping through the entrance with the kind of presence that made the air itself seem to rearrange around him. Tall and broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he moved with the efficiency of someone who calculated every step, every gesture, every second of his carefully controlled existence. 2 business associates flanked him, older men in expensive watches and practiced smiles who laughed too loudly at things that weren't particularly funny. But it was the 3 little girls trailing behind him that made Megan's breath catch in her throat. Emma, Sophia, and Olivia. She'd overheard their names whispered in the kitchen. They were identical in the uncanny way that only triplets could be. The same heart-shaped faces, the same blonde hair pulled back in matching French braids, the same delicate features that would have been beautiful if they hadn't looked so carefully blank. They wore coordinated white dresses with lace collars and patent leather Mary Janes that clicked softly against the marble floor. They walked in a perfect line, hands clasped in front of them, looking like 3 porcelain dolls arranged in a shop window. Megan watched from her position near the service station as they were seated. Kurt pulled out his own chair first, already deep in conversation with his associates about quarterly projections and market positioning. The girls climbed into their chairs without assistance, positioning themselves with eerie precision, spines straight, hands folded in their laps. No fidgeting. No whispering. No childhood restlessness. That's when Megan saw them. The hearing aids. Small and discreet, barely visible behind each girl's ear, but unmistakable once you knew to look. Her chest constricted. She watched as Kurt continued talking, his voice carrying across the private dining area. The girl's eyes tracked his mouth with laser focus, their heads tilting slightly as they tried to catch every word through lip reading. One of the associates gestured broadly while telling a story, and Megan saw the middle girl, Sophia, she thought, lean forward slightly, squinting, trying desperately to follow a conversation that was moving too fast, with too many speakers, in too noisy an environment. Then Kurt laughed at something, a sharp bark of amusement, and all 3 girls immediately arranged their faces into smiles. Not real smiles, the kind children give when they have no idea what's funny but know the appropriate response is expected. The practiced blankness that followed, the retreat back into that careful stillness, was like watching 3 lights dim simultaneously. Megan knew that look. God help her, she knew it in her bones. It was the same expression Lily used to wear at family gatherings when cousins talked over each other and adults forgot to face her when they spoke. The exhausted smile that said, "I'm trying so hard to belong to a world that isn't built for me." The resignation of being present in body but isolated in experience, drowning in a sea of sound that meant nothing, surrounded by people who couldn't be bothered to throw a lifeline. These girls weren't being protected by their father's rules. They were being erased. The dinner conversation rolled forward like a freight train, picking up momentum with each course. Kurt Brown held court at the head of the table, his voice sharp and commanding as he dissected a potential acquisition with surgical precision. The 2 associates, a silver-haired man named Gerald and a younger executive who kept checking his phone, nodded along, interjecting strategic questions designed to showcase their own insight. The Shanghai market is vulnerable, Kurt said, cutting into his steak with the same decisive motion he probably used to sign termination papers. Their infrastructure is outdated. Their leadership is scattered. We move in Q2, make the offer before they realize how badly they need us, and by Q3 we've absorbed their client base entirely. He paused, took a sip of wine. Competitive advantage isn't about being better. It's about making sure no one else has the chance to compete. Gerald laughed, a booming sound that bounced off the high ceilings. Ruthless as ever, Kurt. That's why you're worth $4 billion and I'm merely along for the ride. The girls sat in their perfect row, watching lips move, heads turning like spectators at a tennis match. Occasionally, one of them would reach for her water glass or adjust her napkin. Small movements executed with careful precision. Kurt's hand would drift to the nearest daughter's head in an absent gesture, a pat, a brief touch, before returning to his wine glass or his fork. The kind of acknowledgement you'd give a well-behaved pet. Megan approached with their second course, setting plates down with practiced silence. Duck confit for the men, simple grilled chicken for the girls, ordered without consulting them, she'd noticed. As she worked, Emma, the girl on the end, shifted in her chair. Her small hand reached out tentatively toward her father's sleeve. She tapped his arm once, twice, trying to get his attention. Kurt didn't look at her. He was mid-sentence, explaining the intricacies of a hostile takeover. His free hand moved to gently but firmly relocate Emma's fingers back to her own lap, the gesture so automatic it didn't even interrupt his speech. The key is timing. Strike before they've secured additional funding, before they've diversified their. Emma tried again, more insistently now. Her hand reached for his arm, her mouth forming words Megan couldn't quite see. But Kurt, deep in his analysis of market vulnerabilities, moved her hand away again with slightly more force. Stay still. Be good. Not now. Megan watched Emma's face crumple. The little girl pulled her hand back as if burned, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. She reached blindly for her water glass, movements jerky with suppressed emotion, and her elbow caught the crystal stem. The glass tipped, wobbled, then tumbled, sending ice water cascading across the white tablecloth and onto Emma's white dress. The conversation stopped. Kurt turned, finally, his expression flickering with irritation before settling into forced patience. Emma, careful. His voice was gentle but distant, the tone you'd use with a stranger's child. Emma stared down at her lap, at the spreading water stain, and Megan saw her bottom lip tremble. The little girl's hands moved slightly, forming a sign, sorry, but Kurt had already turned back to Gerald, already resuming his thought about market timing. And in that moment, Megan wasn't standing in the Lumiere Grand Hotel anymore. She was in an elementary school cafeteria, 7 years in the past, watching Lily sit alone at a table while other children laughed and shouted around her. Watching her little sister raise her hand to try to join a conversation, only to be overlooked, talked over, ignored. Watching the exact same expression cross Lily's face, the resignation, the understanding that she was invisible not because she was quiet, but because the hearing world had decided she wasn't worth the effort of listening. Emma's hands were still forming that sign. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Speaking to no one, heard by no one. Until Megan's carefully constructed walls shattered completely. Megan's hands were trembling as she reached for the fallen water glass, her mind screaming contradictory commands. Walk away. Follow protocol. You need this job. Patricia's warning echoed in her skull. Invisible service only, don't acknowledge them, immediate termination. She had $17 in her checking account and rent due in 4 days. She couldn't afford to lose this position. She couldn't afford to care. But Emma's face, that devastating combination of shame and loneliness and desperate, aching hope that someone might notice, was Lily's face. And Megan had spent 7 years telling herself that if she could go back, if she could have just one more moment with her sister, she would do everything differently. She would speak up when teachers ignored Lily's raised hand. She would confront the parents who pulled their children away at the playground. She would be braver, louder, fiercer. Here was her chance. Not with Lily, but with 3 little girls who needed someone to see them just as desperately. Her hands began to move before her conscious mind gave permission. Years of locked-away muscle memory took over. fingers forming shapes she'd sworn she'd never make again. The sign emerged slowly, carefully, her hand shaking so badly she had to steady one wrist with the other. "Are you okay?" The world stopped turning. Emma's head snapped up, eyes enormous, mouth falling open in shock. Sophia and Olivia froze mid-breath, staring at Megan's hands as if they'd just witnessed something impossible. 4-3 heartbeats. No one moved. The business conversation continued in the background. Kurt saying something about leveraged buyouts, but it seemed to come from very far away, muffled and irrelevant. Then Sophia's hands began to move. Slowly at first, hesitant, as if testing whether this was real or some cruel joke. You know sign." Megan nodded, her throat too tight to speak even if she'd wanted to. She signed back. "Yes. I can understand you." The dam broke. All three girls began signing at once, their hands flying, their faces transformed with desperate joy. Years of unspoken thoughts, unasked questions, unshared feelings came pouring out in a torrent of movement. Emma signed about how the water was an accident. She just wanted to ask if they could please leave soon because the restaurant was too loud and her hearing aids were making everything buzz. Olivia signed that she was hungry but didn't like duck and was too scared to say so. Sophia signed that no one ever talked to them, that people always talked about them or around them but never to them. And did Megan really truly understand what they were saying? Megan's vision blurred with tears as she signed back, answering each girl in turn. "The water doesn't matter. What would you like to eat instead? I understand every word. I see you. I've always been able to see you." Emma's small hand reached out and grabbed Megan's wrist, holding on as if she might disappear. The little girl's eyes were streaming now, her chest heaving with silent sobs of relief. She signed with one hand, still gripping Megan with the other. "No one has ever talked to us like this. No one except our teacher at school. Our daddy doesn't know how." And that's when Kurt Brown turned around and saw his daughters' faces, radiant, alive, laughing through their tears, and realized what he'd been denying them all along. Kurt had been in the middle of explaining the projected ROI on the Shanghai acquisition when he felt it. A shift in the air, a disturbance in the carefully controlled environment he'd orchestrated. Gerald was saying something about due diligence, but Kurt's attention snagged on movement in his peripheral vision. His daughters. Something was different. He turned, and the words died in his throat. Emma was crying. Not the quiet, hidden tears she sometimes shed when she thought he wasn't looking, but open, gasping sobs that shook her small shoulders. But her face. God, her face was radiant. She was smiling through the tears, her eyes bright and alive in a way he hadn't seen since Catherine. Since before Catherine. Sophia and Olivia were leaning forward in their chairs, their hands moving rapidly through the air, and they were laughing. Actually laughing, their mouths open with joy, their whole bodies animated with an energy he'd forgotten they possessed. And there, crouched beside the table, was the waitress, the shy one who'd barely made eye contact when taking their order. Her hands were moving too, forming shapes and gestures that flowed like water, like music, like a language Kurt suddenly realized he should have learned 5 years ago. His daughters were having a conversation. A real conversation. Their faces were expressive and engaged, their hands flying back and forth with the waitress in a dialogue he couldn't understand but could feel in his chest like a physical ache. This was what connection looked like. This was what it meant to be truly heard. Emma still had her hand wrapped around the waitress's wrist, holding on for dear life, and she was signing something with her free hand. Rapid movements that made the waitress's eyes fill with tears. Whatever his daughter was saying, it was important. It was urgent. It was something she'd needed to say for so long that it was bursting out of her now like water from a broken dam. And he had no idea what it was. The realization hit Kurt like a freight train. 5 years. 5 years of building walls to protect them, of controlling their environment, of keeping the world at a safe distance so nothing could hurt them the way losing Catherine had hurt him. 5 years of private schools with small class sizes and carefully vetted staff. 5 years of declining birthday party invitations and playdate requests because other children might be cruel, might not understand, might make his daughters feel different. 5 years of making sure they were safe. And in doing so, he'd made sure they were alone. He'd told himself it was enough that they had each other, that their triplet bond was sufficient, that they didn't need anyone else, that he was protecting them from a world that wouldn't accommodate their needs. But looking at their faces now, faces transformed by the simple act of being understood by someone outside their tiny, isolated circle, he saw the truth. He hadn't been protecting them. He'd been suffocating them. Catherine would have learned sign language. Catherine would have learned it while she was pregnant, would have had flashcards all over the house, would have made sure he learned too. Catherine would never have let their daughters sit in silence, waiting politely for a world that moved too fast to slow down for them. The tears came before he could stop them. Not the controlled, private grief he allowed himself late at night in his study, but hot, overwhelming tears that blurred his vision and spilled down his cheeks in front of Gerald and Marcus and the entire staff of the Lumiere Grand. He heard Gerald's confused "Kurt," felt Marcus's hand on his shoulder, but he couldn't look away from his daughters. From their joy. From everything he'd stolen from them in the name of protection. Megan didn't remember making the decision to run. One moment she was kneeling beside table 12, her hand still clasped in Emma's grip, watching Kurt Brown's face crumble with an emotion she couldn't name. The next moment Patricia was there, her expression thunderous, physically pulling Megan away from the table with a hissed, "What have you done?" The girl's hands reached after her, signing, "Don't go, please don't go," but Patricia was already marching her toward the kitchen, and Megan's legs were moving on autopilot. The kitchen was chaos. Steam and shouting and the clang of pans. Patricia shoved her toward the storage corridor in the back. "Wait here. Don't move. Mr. Brown is—" She paused, looking genuinely shaken. "Don't move." Megan stood among industrial shelving units stacked with linens and extra china, her whole body trembling. She'd just destroyed everything. $17 in her account and now no job. No references. She'd probably be blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. All because she couldn't follow one simple rule: stay invisible. But when she closed her eyes, all she saw were Emma's tears of joy, Sophia's radiant smile, Olivia signing "thank you" over and over again. If she had to lose everything, at least it was for that. The storage room door opened. Megan's eyes flew open, expecting Patricia, expecting security, expecting to be escorted out through the service entrance in disgrace. Instead, Kurt Brown stepped inside. Alone. No associates, no security detail, no armor of cold professionalism. Just a man whose eyes were still red-rimmed, whose usually perfect tie was slightly loosened, whose hands were shaking as he closed the door behind him. They stared at each other in the dim fluorescent light. Megan opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but Kurt spoke first. "Please don't apologize." His voice cracked on the last word. "Please. I can't bear it if you apologize." Then this man, this billionaire who owned half the city, who made grown executives weep in boardrooms, leaned back against the storage shelves and slid down to the floor, his head in his hands, and began to sob. Megan stood frozen, unsure if she should leave, should call someone, should do anything. But then Kurt looked up at her with devastated eyes and said, "My wife died giving birth to them. Did you know that?" Megan shook her head, slowly lowering herself to sit on the floor across from him, her back against the opposite shelf. "Catherine. She hemorrhaged during the C-section. They couldn't stop it." His voice was hollow. "One moment I was waiting to meet my daughters, and the next they were telling me to say goodbye to my wife. The girls were in the NICU, so small they fit in my hands, and Catherine was gone. Just gone. He dragged a hand across his face. They diagnosed the hearing loss at 6 months. Profound, bilateral, permanent. And I was already drowning. I was a single father with 3 infants, running a company, and grief was... He laughed bitterly. Grief was eating me alive. So I did what I do best. I controlled things. I hired the best specialists, the best therapists, the best private school. I built a perfect, safe environment where nothing could hurt them. But you never learned to sign, Megan said softly. Kurt's face crumpled again. I told myself they were getting speech therapy, that they could lip read, that they didn't need it because I was paying for the best hearing aids money could buy. He looked at her with raw desperation. But the truth is I was terrified. Catherine would have learned. Catherine would have been fluent in 6 months. And learning it without her felt like admitting she was really gone. His voice dropped to a whisper. I became the very thing they needed protection from. I was so busy keeping the world away that I never realized I was the one making them invisible. Megan's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. Her name was Lily. My little sister. She was 7 when she died. Kurt looked up, his eyes focusing on her with sudden intensity. My mom died when I was 14, and it was just the 2 of us after that. Lily was born deaf, profound hearing loss, just like your daughters. Megan's hands twisted in her lap. I was 15 when we got the diagnosis confirmed. I checked out every book the library had on sign language. Practiced in the mirror for hours every night. My friends thought I was weird, spending all my time learning this language for a toddler who couldn't hear me anyway. She smiled, but it was edged with pain. But Lily, God, she was brilliant. So bright and curious and funny. She had this sign she made up just for me. It wasn't real ASL, just our thing. She'd trace a heart over my hand before she signed sister. Every single time. Kurt's expression softened. She sounds beautiful. She was. For 7 years she was my whole world. We had our own language, our own jokes. I was going to go to college for deaf education. I was going to spend my life building bridges for kids like her. Megan's voice cracked. And then one rainy afternoon, a driver was texting. Ran a red light. Lily was crossing the street to meet me after school. She stopped, unable to continue for a moment. Kurt waited, not filling the silence. Gone in an instant, Megan finally whispered. And I couldn't sign anymore. Every time my hands tried to form a word, all I saw was her face. So I buried it. Buried the language, buried my plans, buried everything except the grief. I thought if I never signed again, maybe it would hurt less. Did it? Kurt asked quietly. No. It just made me hollow. Megan looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Until tonight. Until I saw your daughters' faces when they realized someone could understand them. And I realized Lily's language isn't a grave marker. It's not something dead that I need to bury. It's alive. It's a bridge. And every time I use it to connect with someone who needs it, she's there too. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Your daughters taught me that. In 5 minutes, they gave me back something I thought was lost forever. Kurt's voice was thick when he spoke. Then we're even. Because in those same 5 minutes, they showed me I've been lost too. 6 months later, Megan stood at the front of a sunlit conference room on the 23rd floor of Brown Industries headquarters, facing 20 executives in business attire who were awkwardly attempting to fingerspell their own names. The view behind her showcased the entire city skyline, but she barely noticed it anymore. This was her fourth class of the week. Remember, the motion comes from your wrist, not your whole arm, she said, demonstrating the sign for understand. And don't be afraid to use facial expressions. They're grammatically necessary in ASL, not just embellishment. In the back row, Kurt Brown frowned in concentration as he tried to sign my daughters. His fingers tangled, and he had to start over. The man who commanded boardrooms with effortless authority was utterly humbled by a language his 8-year-old children spoke fluently. Megan caught his eye and signed slowly. "You're doing great." He smiled, the kind of genuine smile she'd seen more frequently in recent months, and signed back, "Liar." But his eyes were warm. The girls were thriving. They attended an inclusive school now where half the students were deaf and all the teachers signed. They had friends, real friends who understood them, who shared their language, who invited them to sleepovers and birthday parties. Emma had discovered a love for painting. Sophia wrote poetry that she performed in ASL at school assemblies. Olivia was learning piano, feeling the vibrations through her hands, creating music in her own way. Their personalities, so long suppressed, had bloomed into something extraordinary. Tonight was the company's annual gala, and the girls had asked to speak. Megan stood at the side of the ballroom as Emma, Sophia, and Olivia took the stage in matching blue dresses, facing 500 employees and stakeholders. A voice interpreter stood beside them as their hands began to move. "Our Aunt Megan taught us that being deaf isn't something broken," Emma signed, her movements confident and clear. "It's just a different way of being in the world." "She taught our daddy that love means learning to speak your children's language," Sophia continued. "Even when it's hard. Even when it scares you. And she taught us," Olivia finished, "that sometimes the people who save you are the ones who needed saving too." Kurt was crying openly in the front row. So was Gerald. So was nearly everyone in the room. The girls found Megan in the crowd, and together they signed, "Thank you for seeing us." Megan's hands moved before she could stop them, forming words only the girls would understand. "Lily sees you too. And she's smiling." Because love, she'd finally learned, was never really lost. It just waited for new hands to carry it forward. Thank you for watching this amazing story till the end. Glad you enjoyed it and don't want to miss many other amazing and mind-blowing stories like this. Subscribe to this channel for more intriguing stories like this. Thanks.